Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know we love to get your suggestions for deep dives, and this time we're tackling one that's, well, let's just say it's a little spicier than usual.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Lay it on us.
All right, so one of our intrepid listeners sent in a transcript, and buckle up because it's from a Spanish YouTube video about what the video calls juegos íntimos, or risky intimate practices.
Juegos íntimos. Risky intimate practices. Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Human behavior, especially when it comes to intimacy, never ceases to fascinate me. What kind of practices are we talking about here?
Well, the video starts off, and I'm not kidding here, by saying the stuff is more dangerous than a shootout.
Whoa. All right, that's quite the opening statement. Talk about a way to hook your audience. You've got to imagine that raises some eyebrows.
Right. And it gets even better, or maybe I should say more intense. The host of the video actually says that YouTube would not be happy about this content. They even had to get creative with the editing to get around censors.
Fascinating. It sounds like we're dealing with some pretty taboo stuff here. I mean, even in this day and age, with so much out in the open, it seems some topics still make people uncomfortable.
Totally. And to add to that whole forbidden knowledge vibe, the host talks about how his editor is basically discovering what the video is about in real time, having to edit on the fly and come up with all these allegories.
Wow. So not only is the content itself pushing boundaries, but even the way it's being presented is pushing back against those boundaries. That definitely says something about the sensitivities surrounding these intimate practices. So spill the beans. What are some of these games you're talking about? Give us the rundown.
All right, so the video lists 7 of these games. Some are, shall we say, more intense than others. We've got the cracker game, the blackout room, and something called the peladao.
Okay, the peladao, that was new to me. The cracker game, well, that just sounds messy on a few different levels. And a blackout room, I'm not even sure I want to know. I have to admit, my curiosity is officially piqued.
Mine too. And I should mention, some of these practices, like unprotected sex, which is also on the list, are things that unfortunately we're probably all too familiar with.
That's true. It's a stark reminder that risk-taking in intimate contexts isn't limited to the fringes of human behavior. It's something that exists on a spectrum, and it's important to understand the different motivations and factors at play.
Exactly. But let's start unpacking some of these, shall we? And maybe we begin with the peladao, since it's probably the most unfamiliar to our listeners. So tell us, what is it and what makes it so risky?
Okay, so from what I gather from the transcript, the peladao focuses on delaying climax, and it involves a very specific method of applying pressure. What I find particularly interesting about this one is what it says about societal expectations, especially the pressures men feel around sexual performance.
Yeah, it's like this whole other level of performance anxiety. And it's not without its risks, right? I mean, the video even mentions people ending up in the hospital because of it.
Absolutely. That's why it's crucial to approach any intimate practice with awareness and caution, especially when it involves pushing boundaries. And the peladao definitely seems to fall into that category.
Okay, so that's the peladao. Practice with a focus on delaying climax that seems to come with some pretty intense risks. Now, how about we move on to something a little more, shall we say, lighthearted? Or at least it sounds that way on the surface. What can you tell us about the cracker game?
All right, so full disclosure, the cracker game, at least as it's described in the transcript, isn't for the faint of heart.
Oh. Okay, you've got my attention again. Give us the lowdown on the cracker game.
Well, picture this. A group of guys, a box of crackers, and a very unconventional and, let's just say, unsavory competition. And the objective of this game, let's just say the loser has to consume something rather unpleasant.
Okay, I'm both curious and slightly nauseous. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, especially considering the whole competition aspect.
Exactly. It highlights how these societal pressures around masculinity can manifest in really unhealthy and potentially dangerous ways, even if it's likely exaggerated for the video.
It's definitely giving me some strange food aversion therapy vibes, that's for sure. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We've got the peladao, which seems to come with some potential physical risks, and the cracker game, which sounds like a recipe for, well, let's just say some unpleasant consequences. Now, tell us about the blackout room. What's that all about?
The blackout room is a bit different. It's less about a specific act and more about the setting and the sensory experience. Imagine this, a room plunged into darkness where all visual cues are eliminated.
Okay, I can already see where this is going. No lights, heightened senses, relying solely on touch and sound. It definitely has a certain air of mystery and excitement, I'll give it that. But what makes it risky?
You're on the right track. The blackout room taps into the thrill of anonymity, the excitement of not knowing what's coming next. And as you can imagine, when you remove visual cues and rely solely on other senses, the potential for misinterpretation and crossed boundaries skyrockets, particularly when it comes to consent.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, clear communication is crucial in any intimate situation, but especially when you're navigating in the dark, literally.
Exactly. It really highlights the importance of establishing clear boundaries and consent beforehand, because things can get lost in translation really easily, even in broad daylight, let alone a blackout. Even with the lights on, consent can be tricky. So, yeah, darkness definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity.
No kidding. So we've talked about the Peladao, the Cracker Game, and the Blackout Room, quite a lineup so far. But this YouTube video labels one practice as the most dangerous of them all, and it's one we've all probably heard of: erotic asphyxiation.
It's a topic that walks a fine line between curiosity and concern. And sadly, it's one that often makes headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Definitely. And the video doesn't shy away from the risks. They even list off celebrities and politicians who've allegedly died from it. It's a stark reminder that this isn't some abstract concept. It has very real and very serious consequences.
Absolutely. Erotic asphyxiation, or breath play as it's sometimes called, is often depicted in movies and TV shows, which can give people a false sense of security.
Mm.
In reality, it's incredibly dangerous, and the pursuit of heightened pleasure, in this case, can be fatal.
It's a harsh reminder that the things that can bring us pleasure can also be incredibly dangerous if we're not careful. And it makes you wonder, what drives people to these risky behaviors in the first place? Is it a purely physical thing, or is there a psychological component at play?
That's a question researchers have been exploring for years, and the answer, as with most things related to human behavior, is complex. It's likely a combination of factors, both biological and psychological.
So nature and nurture, both playing a role.
Exactly. Some people, due to their brain chemistry and individual differences, might be naturally more drawn to novelty and risk-taking than others. It's like that saying, some people are wired to climb mountains.
Okay, that makes sense. But it can't just be about our wiring, right? I mean, we don't exist in a vacuum. Our environment, our experiences, the people around us, they all shape our behaviors too.
Absolutely. Our social circles and upbringing play a huge role. Think about it. These games, they often seem to be about pushing boundaries, testing limits, and sometimes even about fitting in or proving something to yourself or others. And those pressures, especially for young people who are still figuring things out, can be incredibly influential.
It's like, on the one hand, you have this biological drive for novelty and excitement, and on the other, you have these social pressures and expectations that can either amplify or mitigate those drives. It's fascinating, really, how those forces interact.
It is. And speaking of fascinating and maybe a little bit shocking, this YouTube video also mentions something called the Rainbow Party.
The Rainbow Party. Okay, now I'm really curious. That name doesn't exactly scream risky, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
You're right to be skeptical. The Rainbow Party, at least as it's described here, well, it's a bit of a wild card. Let's just say it involves a lot of lipstick, a lot of close contact, and a winner determined by, shall we say, the most colorful outcome.
Okay, wow, I was not expecting that. It sounds like a recipe for some serious hygiene concerns, but also I can't help but think about the potential for coercion and pressure, especially given that there's a winner involved.
You're hitting on some crucial points. Aside from the obvious hygiene implications, the Rainbow Party raises concerns about consent and exploitation. The fact that the winner is often rewarded with further sexual activity can create a situation where individuals, particularly young women, feel pressured to participate beyond their comfort levels.
It's like the classic groupthink scenario where individual boundaries get blurred in the heat of the moment, and people might feel obligated to go along with the crowd even if they're not truly comfortable.
Precisely. It underscores how crucial it is to be aware of your surroundings, to trust your gut, and to never be afraid to speak up for yourself and your boundaries, especially in group settings where alcohol or other substances might be involved.
It's a good reminder that even in situations that seem lighthearted or playful, the potential for harm is real if clear boundaries aren't established and respected.
Right, and that brings us back to the importance of consent and communication.
Always a good thing to emphasize, no matter the context. Okay, so we've covered the Peladao, the Cracker Game, the Blackout Room, erotic asphyxiation, and the Rainbow Party, which definitely lived up to its name in terms of, shall we say, unconventional activities. What else does this YouTube video have in store for us?
Well, we've still got two more games to unpack. One that might bring back some fond, or maybe not so fond, memories for our listeners,
Hmm.
and another that's shrouded in a bit of mystery.
Intriguing. Let's start with the familiar. What's this blast from the past you're referring to?
Get ready for a trip down memory lane, because we're talking about the one and only spin the bottle, also known as the roulette game.
Spin the bottle. Now that takes me back. It's usually associated with awkward teenage parties and stolen kisses, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me it's not all innocent fun and games.
You know me too well. While spin the bottle might seem like a harmless way to explore attraction, especially among younger crowds, it's important to remember that it can also be a slippery slope, particularly when fueled by peer pressure and maybe a little liquid courage.
Ah, yes, because nothing says good decisions like a combination of peer pressure and alcohol, right?
Exactly. What might start as a harmless dare, a spin of the bottle, a quick peck on the cheek, can quickly escalate, especially when boundaries aren't clearly established and respected.
It's a classic example of how even a seemingly innocent game can have unintended consequences when consent goes out the window.
Right. Which is why, no matter the activity, whether it's spin the bottle or something more intimate, it's vital to check in with yourself and your partner to make sure everyone's on the same page and to never feel pressure to do anything you're not comfortable with.
Consent. Always key. Okay, now for the mysterious game you mentioned, the Rainbow Room. The name sounds innocent enough, maybe even a little whimsical, but given what we've uncovered so far, I'm guessing appearances can be deceiving.
You'd be right to be cautious. The Rainbow Room, at least in the context of this YouTube video, is less of a game and more of a social experiment, one that plays on our natural curiosity, our desire for novelty, and maybe even our fascination with the unknown.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Paint me a picture. What exactly is the Rainbow Room?
Imagine this. A room bathed in different colored lights, each color representing a different theme or activity. Participants are encouraged to move through the different spaces, each offering a unique sensory experience.
Interesting. It sounds a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure for adults, but where does the risk factor come in?
Well, as with many of the practices we've discussed, the Rainbow Room hinges on consent and clear communication. While some people might see it as a harmless way to explore different desires and fantasies, others might feel pressured to participate in activities they're not comfortable with, especially given the group setting and the potential for anonymity.
It's like, even when it's presented as a game or an experiment, the same rules apply. Consent and communication are non-negotiable no matter what.
100%. It's all about creating a culture where people feel empowered to own their desires and boundaries.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the Pillow to the cracker game to erotic asphyxiation. This YouTube video has certainly taken us on a wild ride. But beyond the shock value and the sometimes cringe-worthy descriptions, what are the key takeaways here? What can we learn from all of this?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that human sexuality is incredibly diverse. And what might seem shocking or even taboo to one person is another person's lived experience.
It's a good reminder not to judge a book by its cover, or in this case, a person by their intimate choices, right?
Exactly. And beyond that, I think this deep dive highlights that risk-taking in general is a fundamental part of what it means to be human. It's wired into us, to varying degrees, of course.
It's like that saying, no risk, no reward. Whether it's skydiving or starting a business or exploring these intimate practices we've been discussing, there's something about pushing boundaries that appeals to us. But of course, with risk comes the potential for consequences, and I think it's important to understand why people engage in these risky behaviors.
Absolutely. And as we touched upon earlier, there are both biological and psychological factors at play. Some people, due to their genetics, brain chemistry, all of that, are just naturally more inclined to take risks. It's like some of us are hardwired for that adrenaline rush, that feeling of living on the edge.
That makes sense. But it's not as simple as saying it's all in our genes, right? I mean, we don't exist in a vacuum. Our environment, our experiences, people around us, they all influence our behaviors too.
100%. Our environment, our upbringing, the people we surround ourselves with, all of that plays a role in shaping who we are and how we navigate the world, including our intimate lives.
It's complex, that's for sure. It's like on the one hand, you've got this biological drive for novelty and excitement. And on the other, you've got these social pressures and expectations that can really amplify or maybe even mute those drives. It's fascinating how that all plays out.
It really is. And it's especially interesting when you think about how technology and social media are changing the landscape. With easy access to all kinds of content, young people are exposed to a lot more, a lot sooner than previous generations, and that comes with its own set of challenges.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with images and messages about what's considered hot or cool, and it can be tough to separate fact from fiction, especially when you're young and still trying to figure things out. And when it comes to intimacy, those blurred lines can have serious consequences.
Exactly. Which is why, and I can't stress this enough, open and honest conversations about sex and intimacy are more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need to create a space where young people, all people really, feel safe talking about these things, about their desires and boundaries, without feeling judged or ashamed.
Right. It's about education. It's about fostering a culture of respect and responsibility. And it's about recognizing that everyone's journey is different.
It's about understanding that intimacy in all its forms should be about pleasure, connection, and mutual respect, not about pressure or coercion or putting yourself or others at risk.
Well said. It's about making informed choices that feel good for you and your partner. And that includes prioritizing safety and well-being, always.
To our listeners out there, thanks for coming along on this wild ride. We've explored the good, the bad, and the just plain strange, and hopefully we've left you with a few things to think about.
It's all about sparking those conversations, challenging our assumptions, and maybe even expanding our understanding of what it means to be human.
We'll leave you with this. Curiosity is a beautiful thing, but when it comes to intimacy, remember that knowledge is power, and safety and consent should always be your top priorities. Until next time, keep those deep dive suggestions coming.